Leaders of the Women's March recently announced that Bernie Sanders would be one of 42 speakers at an upcoming event. And of course, this pissed off a lot of people. And when I say it pissed off a lot of people, I'm talking about the usual suspects who hate Bernie Sanders and like to bash Bernie Sanders. I'm talking about Clintonistas. So according to Vanessa Williams of the Boston Globe, she writes that leaders of the Women's March apologized Saturday for the hurt and confusion among women who disagreed with the decision to have Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders speak on the opening night of its first national convention. Critics had protested on social media that Sanders not only had run a negative campaign against Hillary Clinton in last year's Democratic presidential primary, but also that he and his supporters continue to push the Democratic Party away from its base of women and people of color toward the concerns of the white working class. "We are sorry we caused hurt and confusion for so many of you this week," read the first in a series of tweets by the Women's March. Stephanie Shryock, president of Emily's List, which works to elect Democratic women who support abortion rights, said choosing Sanders to open the convention sends the wrong message. Sanders, during last year's campaign, described himself as a democratic socialist. As such, he was often criticized for focusing on economic solutions while downplaying the role of institutional racism and sexism in social inequalities. He became a hero of white progressives but could not compete with Clinton's support among people of color and women. Sanders also lost favor with women because some of his progressive male followers were accused of harassing women and people of color on social media.
The lie detector test determined that was a lie.
So there's a lot going on there, but let me just say first of all that I do understand why they would initially object to not just Bernie Sanders, but any man headlining an event titled the Women's March, because this is supposed to be about the elevation of female voices. So I do get that. But contrary to popular belief, Bernie Sanders is not the headlining speaker. He is just one of 42 people that will be speaking in total. And furthermore, Bernie Sanders is just one of 2 men who will actually be speaking at this event. So you have 40 female speakers in total. So I mean, this event absolutely elevates and empowers women. And just because Bernie Sanders is the most famous speaker there doesn't mean that this event will be about him specifically. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a feminist, and he will undoubtedly use this platform to elevate women and elevate feminist issues. But it's not just that a man is speaking at this event, because there was also another man speaking, as I mentioned, Abdul El Sayed, but nobody was angry about him being there. And this is because they don't want Bernie Sanders to speak for petty reasons that were stated in this article. They said Bernie ran a negative campaign against Hillary Clinton. In other words, they were butthurt that Bernie Sanders decided to challenge Hillary Clinton, who the establishment anointed as the party's nominee before anyone else decided to enter the race. So that's really what this is about. They just don't like Bernie Sanders, and as a result, they're still smearing Bernie Sanders. In fact, this article deliberately misconstrues Bernie Sanders' message by hiding behind identity politics, saying he and his supporters continue to push the Democratic Party away from its base of women and people of color towards the concerns of white working-class Americans. And also, they state, he was often criticized for focusing on economic solutions while downplaying the role of institutional racism and sexism in social inequalities. He became a hero of white progressives. Now, this suggests that Bernie Sanders only appeals to white males. This is factually incorrect. And the argument is that since this is the case, I mean, it's really a slap in the face to women of color at this event to bring on a speaker that doesn't care about them and only cares about white males. But that's not true. Bernie Sanders' message of economic justice is all-inclusive. In fact, the policies that he's pushing for, like Medicare for All, tuition-free public colleges and universities, these are policies that would disproportionately benefit people of color, specifically women of color. So his message does not just appeal to white progressives. That is actually a false establishment talking point that the likes of Joy Reid use to smear Bernie Sanders, but it's no longer true, because when you look at a Harvard-Harris survey, they found that Bernie Sanders actually has the highest approval rating among women by 3 points, and when you look at racial demographics, he has the highest approval rating among African Americans with 73%, followed by Hispanics and Asian Americans with 68 and 62% respectively. In fact, he has the lowest approval rating among whites, contrary to popular opinion, but they still do approve of him like most people in this country, hence why he is the most popular politician in America. So their objection to Bernie Sanders speaking at the Women's March is based entirely on false pretenses. And when I say they, I mean Clintonistas and neoliberals specifically, have tried to co-opt the Women's March and make it about Hillary Clinton and make it about them. But really, the Women's March is an all-inclusive event. It's for the entire left and center left. I mean, some of the speakers are Nina Turner, Winnie Wong, Nomiki Konst. This is an event for progressive women as well as center-left women. It's for all women, really. So, in trying to smear Bernie Sanders and say that he shouldn't speak here, they're trying to perpetuate the divisions in the Democratic Party. And this isn't just about he said, she said. I mean, I wanted to point out a real arbitrary instance here where people who are Hillary Clinton supporters are smearing Bernie Sanders because they're butthurt. Well, get over it. He's the most popular politician in the country, and one poll showed that he is the favorite in 2020. Now, I know it's still early, but if you truly want to defeat Donald Trump and actually defeat Republicans in 2018 and 2020, this has got to stop. It's divisive. If you're going to attack Bernie Sanders, do it for substantive policy-based reasons. You know, I get it if you don't like his take on foreign policy sometimes, and that sometimes he's a little bit too pro-Israel to the detriment of Palestine. I think that his free college plan should also take care of those of us who already have a massive amount of debt. I mean, there are legitimate reasons to criticize Bernie Sanders. This is not one of them. So Bernie Sanders will not be the main event. Just because he's the most famous speaker doesn't mean that he is the main event here. He's just one of 42 speakers. And the goal here is to elevate women and women's issues. And Bernie Sanders is going to obviously do that. So, I mean, I just don't see how the left can ever come together if we have people smearing Bernie Sanders for the most ridiculous reasons ever that are just not true.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.